She had always been a person who relied on order, discipline, and precision. Years of serving in the Navy had taught her to control every situation, plan every move, and prepare for the unexpected. Nothing left to chance. Nothing unmonitored. That mindset had worked well in her career, where lives depended on split-second decisions and careful strategy. But nothing in her experience had prepared her for the quiet fear that now filled her home every time she stepped out and left her children behind. Her triplets were young, lively, and full of personality, but they had each been diagnosed with conditions that left them paralyzed from the waist down. It was a reality that shaped every aspect of her life. Daily routines were not just chores. They were missions. Feeding, bathing, turning, and comforting them required a precise schedule and constant vigilance. She loved them with every fiber of her being, but the burden of responsibility weighed on her like an invisible weight. She could not always be there. Military duties called her away for days, sometimes weeks. And every time she left, a gnawing worry took root in her chest, to ease her anxiety. She had taken the step of installing cameras in her home. Discreet, small, high-definition cameras that covered every corner of the living room, the kitchen, and the areas where the children spent most of their time. They were her eyes when she could not be physically present. She justified it as ensuring their safety, making sure that whoever was in her home during her absence performed their tasks properly. She trusted few people, and even among those she did, her vigilance remained high. The cameras gave her a sense of control, a way to make sure nothing went wrong in her absence. She reviewed the footage almost obsessively. Morning routines, midday feeding, nap times, and evening activities. Every action was scrutinized. She expected efficiency, attentiveness, and care. Any deviation from the routine made her uneasy. Yet despite the cameras, despite her careful planning, a part of her still worried. What if something went wrong that the cameras could not prevent? What if the people she relied on faltered when she was away? It was during one of these moments of surveillance that she first noticed him. A janitor, a man who worked in the building complex near her home, someone she had seen in passing, but never paid much attention to. He was a simple man, dressed in a plain uniform, moving about with a quiet diligence. There was nothing about him that suggested he would play any significant role in her life, let alone in the lives of her children. Yet, on that day, he appeared on camera, quietly stepping through the open gate of her property. She frowned, her first instinct a sharp spike of suspicion. Who was he? Why was he here? Her military training kicked in immediately. She paused the footage and rewound, studying his movements frame by frame. He did not look threatening. He did not carry any tools or items that could be dangerous. Instead, he moved with care, gently entering the living room where the children were. Her heart rate increased. This was her home, her responsibility, and she did not know this man. And yet, what she saw next left her frozen. He approached the triplets slowly, speaking softly in a calm, reassuring tone. He adjusted the pillows under their heads with precise care, ensuring they were comfortable. He straightened the blankets, tucked in their tiny feet, and brushed back stray strands of hair from their faces. She watched, astonished, as the children responded instantly to him. Their faces brightened with smiles, and even a quiet giggle escaped one of them. She had never heard that sound before, not in weeks, maybe months. Her surprise turned into disbelief. Who was this man? How did he know how to make her children so happy? The janitor did not rush. Every movement was deliberate, measured, patient. He helped feed them, but not in a mechanical way. He talked to them as he did so, narrating every step, telling them little stories, making them laugh with small jokes and funny faces. She saw him lift one child gently onto his lap, rocking her slowly while singing a soft, unrecognizable tune. Her lips parted in shock. She had hired nurses and aides before, some trained extensively, yet none could elicit such a natural reaction from her children. This stranger, this ordinary janitor, seemed to have an instinctive understanding of them. She leaned back from the screen, rubbing her temples. Her mind raced with questions. How had he gotten access to the house? Had someone left the door open? But no, the door was locked, and she had checked it herself before leaving. Yet there he was, acting with care, as if he belonged in the home. Her training urged her to confront the situation immediately, to call security, to demand answers. But another, stranger feeling crept in: curiosity, mingled with awe. She could not take her eyes off the footage. Day after day, she continued to watch. Every time she left for work, she monitored the screens obsessively, half expecting to find him gone or causing trouble. Yet every time, she found him there, quietly moving through her home, tending to her children with the same gentle precision. He read to them from picture books, taught them small songs, played gentle hand games, and somehow, despite their conditions, made them laugh. She saw the bond growing, even from the distance of the camera lens dot. It did not take long for the Admiral to recognize something extraordinary. This man, who had no formal training in caregiving, who had no obligation to her or her family, displayed a depth of empathy and patience she had rarely seen in anyone. His attention to detail was meticulous, yet it was infused with a warmth and gentleness that no training manual could teach. It was instinctive, human, and profoundly touching. Yet, alongside awe, there was also confusion and unease. She had questions. Who was he? Why was he doing this? Did he know what he was doing? Could she trust him? Every military lesson she had learned screamed at her to act, to secure the perimeter, to question this intrusion. But every fiber of her being, every instinct that had nothing to do with discipline or rank, told her to watch. To wait, to see more dot through the screens. She began to notice small details that revealed his character. He never looked at her possessions, never touched anything unnecessary, and never lingered longer than needed in any room. He seemed to work silently, efficiently, with a single-minded purpose, the comfort and happiness of her children. It was as if he had studied them, understood them, and tailored every action to their needs. She saw how he handled each of the triplets differently, adjusting his tone, gestures, and pace depending on who he was interacting with. One child loved gentle rocking, another responded to playful chatter, and the third thrived on storytelling. The janitor knew it instinctively, and the children responded with trust and joy. She felt a mix of emotions that she could not easily categorize: surprise, awe, disbelief, curiosity, and something deeper, an emerging respect for the man she had never spoken to. She felt a flicker of admiration, tinged with guilt for judging him before knowing him. She realized how easy it was to misjudge someone based on appearances, how assumptions could blind her to the truth. This man, a janitor, humble and unassuming, possessed a heart larger than many she had met in her elite world dot as days turned into a week. The surveillance became almost a ritual. She would check the cameras at specific times, not to catch mistakes, but to witness small miracles, the laughter of her children, the tenderness of a stranger who had become their unexpected caretaker. And each day, her initial suspicion melted a little more. She began to see that care, love, and kindness were not tied to rank, training, or status. They were human qualities, rare and precious, and sometimes found in the most unlikely places. The janitor's presence was transforming the house in ways she could not have imagined. There was a new warmth, a sense of calm, a rhythm that comforted not only her children, but in a strange way, her as well. Watching him, she began to reflect on her own life, the discipline, the rigid routines, the constant striving for control. And she realized that perhaps some things could not be planned, controlled, or executed with precision. Some things, like the genuine happiness of children, required something softer, something intuitive, something human. She did not know what the future held, nor did she understand why this man had appeared in her life. But for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to simply observe without judgment, to appreciate the beauty of compassion in its purest form. The cameras, which had been tools of control and vigilance, had unexpectedly become windows into something far more profound. Through them, she was witnessing not just care, but a connection that transcended duty, a bond formed by kindness, patience, and heart. And so she continued to watch, each day learning a little more about the janitor, about her children, and, unknowingly, about herself. She was a woman trained to lead, to command, to plan for every eventuality. But now she was learning that sometimes the most important lessons come not from discipline or strategy, but from watching, listening, and witnessing the quiet heroism of a man who simply cared. In that moment, she began to understand something essential. Heroism could take many forms. It could be a title, a uniform, a rank. But it could also be quiet, humble, unnoticed, and sometimes it could be a janitor, moving silently through a living room, touching lives more profoundly than she could have ever imagined. She did not know how this story would unfold, nor did she know what the future held for her children or the man who had entered their lives. But she did know this. She could not look away. She had to continue watching. There was something extraordinary happening in her home, something that defied logic, rank, and expectation. And as she watched, she realized that sometimes the most remarkable moments are the ones that arrive quietly, without She had begun to watch the cameras every day, almost like a ritual. Each time she checked, she expected to see routine care, maybe a nurse performing tasks, maybe small mistakes or delays that needed correction. But instead, she saw him, the janitor, quiet, careful, gentle, and always present. It had become almost impossible to look away. Every time she saw him interact with her triplets, she felt a mix of surprise and amazement, but also an odd sense of comfort. He was doing something that she had worried could only be done by trained professionals. Yet he did it naturally, instinctively. He moved slowly through the living room, his hands careful and steady, as if the world around him existed only to serve the moment. The triplets were awake, their faces lit with curiosity and happiness as they watched him. One of them reached a tiny hand toward him, and he responded immediately, picking her up gently, holding her in a way that seemed both protective and tender. He did not hurry. He did not force anything, and yet he seemed to know exactly what each child needed. She leaned closer to the screen, squinting to see details. He adjusted a blanket here, held a spoon there, and whispered small words of encouragement and praise that made the children's faces light up. He laughed softly with them, making funny faces, and the children responded with giggles and squeals of delight. The scene was ordinary in its simplicity, yet extraordinary in its effect. She had never heard her children laugh like this with anyone outside of herself or her closest family. The warmth he brought to the room seemed almost magical. Each day, the pattern repeated. She watched him feed them, play with them, and comfort them when they became restless or upset. He seemed to anticipate their needs before they even made a sound, moving like a shadow that knew every corner of the room. Sometimes he would read aloud from a small book, his voice soft and expressive, and the children would lean forward, listening intently. One of them, usually quiet and reserved, would clap her hands or babble with joy. The janitor would respond with gentle encouragement, praising her effort and smiling in a way that felt natural, not rehearsed. The Admiral found herself thinking about him constantly. Who was he? How did he know what to do? Why was he helping her children without being asked or paid? She began to pay attention to details in his movements, noticing small acts of care that anyone else might have missed. When one of the children drooled, he wiped it away with a soft cloth, speaking to her gently to make her feel comfortable. When another child became frustrated trying to hold a toy, he adjusted it in her hand with patience and encouragement, never showing irritation or impatience. Everything he did was thoughtful, intentional, and full of kindness. Despite her training and her usual reliance on logic and discipline, she began to feel a sense of awe that was difficult to explain. She had spent her life evaluating people based on performance, skill, and adherence to rules. But here was a man with no official training, no rank, no title, showing an understanding of her children that few professionals could match. His ability to connect with them, to sense their moods, to respond with empathy and patience, was something that could not be measured by credentials. It was human, raw, and beautiful. She watched him adjust the room to suit the children's needs. A pillow was placed just right for comfort. A blanket was tucked carefully. Toys were arranged so each child could reach them easily. He spoke to them constantly, explaining what he was doing, asking for small gestures of response, and celebrating every little success. The triplets responded eagerly, leaning toward him, reaching out, and sometimes squealing with delight. When he made a funny noise or moved in a playful way, it became clear to her that he was doing this for more than a sense of duty. He seemed to care deeply, genuinely, as if their happiness mattered to him personally. And the more she watched, the more she realized that the children were responding not just to his actions, but to the love and attention behind them. They trusted him. They laughed with him. They sought him out. And he never failed them, never became impatient, never acted as though their needs were a burden. She found herself thinking about what kind of person he must be. She imagined him walking home after work, carrying the weight of his own life struggles, yet still finding time and energy to care for others. She wondered about his family, about what had shaped him to be so naturally giving, so intuitively kind. She realized that she had been wrong to judge him at first, to assume that someone without status or rank could not possibly make a difference in her children's lives. The days turned into a rhythm. Every morning, she would check the cameras as soon as she had a quiet moment. She would see him enter her home, carefully wash his hands, and approach the triplets. She would watch him interact with them, noticing the little details, the way he tilted his head to listen, the way he laughed softly when they made a noise, the gentle reassurances he whispered when they grew frustrated. It was a rhythm that brought her a strange mix of comfort and awe. She began to notice small habits that revealed even more about his character. He never took more than he needed, never lingered unnecessarily in any room, and never made her children feel rushed or pressured. He seemed to live in the moment, focused entirely on their happiness and comfort. His actions were quiet, understated, yet profoundly impactful. Watching him, she realized that the essence of care was not in grand gestures or visible effort, but in the consistent, patient, and thoughtful attention to the smallest needs. One afternoon, she noticed something that made her heart ache with emotion. One of the triplets, who had been unusually quiet and withdrawn, suddenly reached for him as he entered the room. He responded immediately, lifting her gently onto his lap and holding her with a tenderness that seemed to radiate warmth. He sang softly to her, a song with no words she could recognize, but his voice was soothing, comforting, and full of love. The child leaned into him, her little hands clutching his shirt, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled broadly. The Admiral felt a lump in her throat. She had expected to see her children cared for in a mechanical way, but this was something entirely different. She watched for hours sometimes, captivated by the interactions. Each day brought new moments, new displays of patience, creativity, and love. He would invent little games, tell silly stories, or create fun activities that engaged the children and made them laugh. She noticed how he adapted to their moods, sometimes playful, sometimes calm, always present. It was as if he had an innate understanding of how to bring joy and comfort to their lives. Her admiration grew alongside her curiosity. She wanted to know more about him, to understand who he was and what motivated him. She wondered if he had children of his own, if he had faced struggles that shaped his empathy, or if he simply had a heart that overflowed with kindness. She realized that she had been watching someone extraordinary, someone who had entered her life without asking, without seeking recognition, and yet had become an essential part of her children's world. At the same time, she struggled with conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to confront him immediately, to demand explanations, or to secure her home. Her military instincts urged caution, suspicion, and control. But another part of her, a quieter, more human part, urged patience, observation, and understanding. She could not bring herself to act harshly. Something about the way he cared for her children, the way they trusted and loved him, made her realize that this man was different. He was not a threat. He was a gift. She began to reflect on her own life, her routines, her constant striving for control. Watching him, she realized that she had been missing something vital, the simple, human connection that could not be planned or scheduled. She had relied on rules, on discipline, on careful monitoring to ensure her children's well-being. And yet, this man, with no rank, no training, and no obligation, was providing something more valuable than rules or schedules. He was giving her children attention, patience, laughter, and love. She noticed the way he moved through the home, how he seemed to sense the children's moods before they expressed them, how he responded with exactly the right level of encouragement or comfort. One child, frustrated with trying to hold a toy, would suddenly find her hand guided gently by his, and a frustrated frown would turn into a delighted smile. Another child, tired from a nap, would find herself soothed with a soft hum or a gentle sway. Each moment was small, yet each made a profound difference. As the days passed, she began to see patterns that spoke volumes about his character. He never looked around the house for valuables. He never lingered for personal gain. He entered, focused entirely on her children, and left quietly when his work was done. It was a rhythm of care, humility, and consistency that impressed her deeply. She began to see him not as a janitor, not as a stranger, but as someone who belonged in her children's lives, even if she had not yet met him in person. The cameras, meant to give her control and assurance, had revealed something far greater. They had shown her the quiet heroism of a man who acted out of compassion rather than duty. They had shown her that care, empathy, and patience were sometimes found in the most unexpected places. And they had shown her that her children's happiness, their laughter, and their trust were worth more than any plan, any schedule, or any training manual could provide. She watched him one evening as he sat on the floor with the children, teaching them a simple hand game. Their faces were lit with joy, their eyes sparkling with excitement, their giggles filling the room. He moved with gentle precision, guiding their hands, encouraging their efforts, celebrating their successes. She felt tears prick her eyes as she watched. This was not just care. This was love. This was connection. This was something she had never expected to find in the life of a janitor. By the end of the week, she realized that her perspective had shifted. The initial suspicion, the instinct to control and monitor, had given way to admiration, respect, and a deep sense of gratitude. She did not know how or why he had entered their lives, but she knew one thing: her children were happier, calmer, and more engaged because of him. And she could not take her eyes off the screen, because every moment revealed more of the extraordinary bond he was forming with them. And every moment reminded her that true heroism sometimes comes quietly, humbly, and unexpectedly. Had begun to notice the small things. Not the grand gestures that made headlines, but the tiny details that spoke volumes about his character. The way he would pause to make sure a blanket was tucked perfectly. The careful adjustment of a pillow so that one child's head rested comfortably. The gentle tone he used when speaking, even when a child became fussy. It was in those small, deliberate acts that his devotion became clear. He was more than someone performing a task. He was someone who cared deeply, intuitively, and entirely. Each day, the janitor seemed to understand the children better. The triplets responded to him instinctively. One of them, usually frustrated by her inability to hold a toy properly, would suddenly grasp it with confidence when he guided her hand. Another, often withdrawn, would perk up at his soft words and reach out eagerly to touch him. Even the youngest, who tended to cry more than play, would calm immediately in his presence, as if sensing that he would never let anything happen to harm her. The Admiral felt a mix of astonishment and something she could not name admiration. Yes, but also a creeping warmth in her chest she was not used to. Through the cameras, she began to notice patterns in his behavior that revealed not just skill but love. He adjusted his pace to match the children's moods, slowing down when they were tired, quickening only when they were alert and ready to play. He invented little games to keep them engaged, sometimes using small toys in ways she had never imagined could bring joy. He sang softly, hummed rhythms, and even spoke in playful tones to make them laugh. Every interaction was thoughtful, deliberate, and full of care. She found herself wondering about his life outside her home. Who was this man who gave so much of himself so quietly and completely? Did he have children of his own? Did he struggle in ways that made him more empathetic? Or was it simply who he was, someone with a heart capable of extending kindness beyond measure? She tried to imagine the hours he spent working, the fatigue of his own daily routines, yet he still found energy to focus entirely on her children, to nurture, teach, and comfort them. The thought was humbling. As the days passed, she saw more than just his skill with the children. She saw his humility, the quiet dignity with which he moved through her home. He never touched anything unnecessary. He never lingered for attention or recognition. He entered the living room, focused on the children, and left quietly when his work was done. He seemed to exist in a world where the happiness of others mattered more than his own, and it left her in awe. One morning, she noticed something that gave her pause. The youngest child, who rarely spoke, reached toward him and tried to mimic a sound he had made. He responded immediately, encouraging her with a gentle smile and soft words. Then, as if noticing her hesitance, he whispered encouragement, repeating the sound in a playful way. The child's eyes lit up, and she repeated the sound, laughing with delight. The Admiral felt tears rise in her eyes. It was a moment so ordinary, yet so profound, and she realized that it was happening because of him. She began to reflect on her own life. Military discipline had taught her control, precision, and vigilance. Every decision was measured, every action calculated. But she had never learned how to nurture in the way he did, how to sense the needs of someone else instinctively, or how to bring joy with nothing more than patience and presence. Watching him, she understood that care was not about schedules or procedures. It was about attention, empathy, and love. And in that moment, she felt a deep respect for him. A respect she had never given easily to anyone. It was during one of these afternoons, as the children played quietly around him, that she noticed the subtle ways he managed their environment. He would place a toy just within reach, ensuring that each child could participate. He would angle a chair so that one could see a favorite book, and he would hum softly to maintain a calm atmosphere. His attention to detail was not mechanical. It was thoughtful, almost instinctual, and it created a sense of safety and joy that filled the room. Her curiosity grew alongside her admiration. She wanted to know more about him, not just for herself, but for her children. She wondered how he had come to develop such an extraordinary sense of care. Was it experience, upbringing, or a natural gift? She realized that she would need to meet him to understand the man who had quietly become so important in her children's lives. Yet, at the same time, she hesitated. She was cautious, protective, wary of breaking the fragile trust that had formed. She did not want to scare him away or disrupt the harmony he had created. One afternoon, she watched as he sat cross-legged on the floor with the triplets. They were engaged in a simple game, one that required patience and attention. He guided their hands gently, encouraged their efforts, and celebrated even the smallest successes. Their laughter filled the room, a sound so bright and pure that it seemed to make everything else fade away. She realized in that moment that his influence was not just about completing tasks. It was about building confidence, teaching patience, and nurturing a sense of joy that had been missing in their lives. She began to notice how he adapted to each child's personality. One was quiet, thoughtful, and easily frustrated. He approached her gently, with soft words and a calm demeanor, giving her space to respond at her own pace. Another was lively, eager, and curious, and he engaged her with playful energy, matching her enthusiasm while maintaining control. The third, often withdrawn, would find herself drawn to him through gentle encouragement and small gestures of affection. Every interaction was tailored, intentional, and full of understanding. The Admiral's respect for him deepened with each passing day. She began to see the differences between someone performing a task and someone giving themselves fully to another. He was not simply doing a job. He was living the moment, responding to the children's needs before they were even expressed, and creating a world where they could feel safe, happy, and loved. She realized that true care required more than knowledge or training. It required empathy, patience, and the willingness to put someone else's happiness above your own convenience. Through the cameras, she began to piece together small clues about his life. Occasionally, she noticed a brief glance at a photograph tucked in his wallet, or a small moment of pause where he seemed to reflect on something personal. She imagined the struggles he might have faced, the challenges he might have overcome, and how those experiences could have shaped the depth of his compassion. He seemed to carry a quiet strength, a resilience that allowed him to give so freely despite whatever burdens he might have been carrying himself. One evening, she watched as he helped the triplets with a small puzzle. It was a task that required patience, focus, and guidance. He knelt beside them, explaining each step gently, praising their efforts, and offering encouragement without taking over. When one of them made a mistake, he smiled, reassured her, and guided her back on track without frustration or judgment. The children's faces lit up with pride at their small successes, and she felt a swelling of gratitude for this man she had never expected to meet, yet who had become so integral to her children's lives. She began to realize that she had underestimated the power of human connection. Military training had taught her strategy, discipline, and control, but it had not prepared her for the quiet, transformative effect of compassion. Watching him, she understood that love and care could not be enforced or measured. They were felt, shared, and nurtured through attention, patience, and the willingness to be fully present. He had taught her a lesson she had never anticipated, that the smallest acts of kindness, performed consistently, could change lives profoundly. Days turned into weeks, and her admiration grew. She found herself thinking about him even when she was away, wondering how he was spending his time, hoping that he was safe, and reflecting on the extraordinary way he had entered her children's lives. She realized that the bond he had formed was not something that could be replicated or replaced. It was unique, built on trust, patience, and genuine affection. And she knew that she needed to understand him better, not just for her own curiosity, but for the well-being of her children. Through the camera, She observed moments of quiet reflection. He would sometimes pause, sitting in a chair with one child on his lap, staring out the window as if lost in thought. She imagined him thinking about the lives he had touched, the challenges he had faced, and the reasons he chose to act with such unwavering kindness. She realized that heroism did not always come with recognition or applause. Sometimes it came quietly, humbly, and consistently, in the form of small actions that made a profound difference. By the end of the 3rd week, she knew she could no longer view him as just a janitor. He was something more, someone rare. His presence in her home was not about obligation or duty. It was about choice. He chose to care, to give, and to nurture. And the impact of his choices was visible in every smile, every laugh, every quiet moment of contentment from her triplets. She began to feel a deep sense of gratitude, a recognition that some people entered our lives to teach us lessons we could not have learned otherwise. She also began to notice her own growth. Watching him, she became more patient herself, more aware of the small joys in her children's lives, and more willing to trust in the goodness of others. She understood that control and discipline, while important, could never replace empathy, love, and human connection. He had shown her that true care was about presence, attention, and the willingness to meet others where they were, with kindness and respect. And so, day after day, she continued to watch, learning more about him, about her children, and about herself. Each moment revealed new layers of understanding, compassion, and connection. She had entered this process expecting to monitor and control, but she found herself transformed by observation, learning that the quiet acts of an ordinary man could carry extraordinary weight. Through the cameras, she witnessed not just care, but devotion. She saw someone choosing every day to be present, to nurture, and to bring joy to lives that desperately needed it. And she realized that the greatest heroes are not always those with titles, rank, or recognition. Sometimes they are the ones who act quietly, selflessly, and with a heart full of love. Courtedli.arning, and change everything in their path. For weeks, she had watched him from afar. She had seen his quiet heroism, the patience with which he guided her children, and the warmth he brought into a house that often felt rigid and disciplined. Yet, as much as she admired him, she knew that observation alone was not enough. She could no longer rely solely on the cameras to understand the man who had become so important to her children. It was time to face reality. It was time to meet him. Her heart pounded as she prepared to approach him. The thought of confronting someone she had only seen on a screen made her uneasy. What if she misjudged him? What if he misunderstood her intentions? Military training taught her to plan, to anticipate every outcome, to control situations carefully. But this was different. This was human. This was unpredictable. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that she was not going to accuse him, but to understand him, to see the truth for herself. The day she decided to act, she waited until the children were engaged in a quiet activity. She entered the living room, her presence immediately noticed by the triplets. Their faces lit up, not with fear, but with excitement. They knew her, but they also knew him, and their reactions made her heart swell. She took another deep breath, trying to steady her nerves, and spoke. "Hello," she said softly, her voice calm but firm. I'm watching you care for my children. I think it's time we meet." He looked up, startled for a moment, his eyes wide as he took in her uniform, her authority, her presence. But the surprise did not turn to fear or defensiveness. Instead, he nodded politely, a quiet acknowledgement of the moment. "Yes, ma'am," he said simply, his voice humble, steady, and respectful. There was no hesitation, no defensiveness, only a calm acceptance. She studied him as he worked with the triplets. He had been so confident from a distance, but now she could see him in person, and there was a quiet strength about him that matched what she had seen on the cameras. He did not flinch or act nervous under her gaze. He continued his tasks with the same care, the same attention, and the same patience. He adjusted a pillow here, wiped a spill there, spoke to the children in soft, reassuring tones. And through it all, she noticed the subtle ways he engaged with them, the small gestures, the soft smiles, the gentle encouragements that made the children respond with trust and joy. She could not help but notice the bond he had formed. The triplets ran to him as soon as they saw him, eager for his attention. One clung to his arm, another held his hand, and the youngest rested her head on his shoulder. He responded to each child individually, adjusting his approach based on their personalities, moods, and needs. It was as if he understood them better than anyone else ever could. She realized that this bond had been growing in her absence, unseen, yet profoundly impactful. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally, her voice quieter now, less formal, more personal. She wanted to understand the motivation behind his devotion. She expected some simple explanation. Maybe he liked children. Maybe he felt sorry for them. But she was unprepared for the depth of his answer. He looked at her, his eyes calm and honest. "Because they need it," he said simply. "Because someone should care. Because it's the right thing to do." There was no pretense, no attempt to impress her. His answer was pure and straightforward, a reflection of his character. And in that moment, she realized that heroism did not always announce itself with medals or titles. Sometimes it existed quietly in small actions, in consistent care, and in the willingness to give without expecting anything in return. She felt a rush of emotions: gratitude, relief, admiration, and something deeper that she had not expected. She had worried that leaving her children in anyone's care would be risky, that no one could understand their needs as she did. But here was a man who had not only understood them, but had become a part of their world, someone who had earned their trust and affection without demanding it. The triplets sensed the shift in the room. They smiled at him, giggled, and reached out for his attention. He responded immediately, lifting one onto his lap, holding her gently, and continuing to interact with them as if she were the most important person in the world. The Admiral watched, her chest tight with emotion, realizing that this man had given her children something far more valuable than physical care. He had given them love, trust, and joy. She walked closer, trying not to disrupt the delicate balance he had created. "I've watched you for weeks," she said softly, "through the cameras, and I want to thank you. I didn't expect this. I didn't expect any of this." He looked at her with quiet humility. "I didn't do it for thanks," he said. I did it because they need someone, because they deserve care and happiness. That's enough for me." She felt a lump in her throat. His sincerity, his humility, and his unwavering focus on her children were overwhelming. She realized that all the training, discipline, and control she had relied on in her career could never match what she was witnessing now. This was human, raw, and unquantifiable. And yet, it was exactly what her children needed. The room was filled with laughter and small sounds of joy as he continued to play and interact with the triplets. She watched him guide them through simple games, encourage them gently when they struggled, and celebrate every small success with quiet pride. She noticed how he adapted seamlessly to each child, understanding their moods, personalities, and needs in a way that seemed almost instinctual. She felt a deep sense of respect for him, the kind of respect that goes beyond admiration for skill or talent. This respect was rooted in the recognition of his character, his integrity, and the extraordinary care he had shown without ever seeking recognition or reward. He had entered her children's lives quietly, selflessly, and completely, and the impact was undeniable. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally, her voice tinged with curiosity. "Do you have children of your own?" He hesitated for a moment, and then nodded. "Yes," he said quietly. "I have a son. He's a little older than your children. I lost his mother a few years ago. I tried to do my best for him." Her heart ached at his words. She saw in him not just a caregiver for her children, but a man who had faced his own struggles, who carried his own burdens, yet still found the strength and compassion to help others. She realized that his care for her triplets was an extension of the love he felt for his own child, magnified by his empathy and sense of responsibility. She took a step closer, her voice softening. "You've done something incredible here, more than anyone could have expected. You've given them joy, trust, and love, in ways I couldn't have imagined." He smiled faintly, a quiet acknowledgement of her words. "I didn't think it was incredible," he said. "I just did what I felt was right. They needed someone, and I could help. That's all." She felt a deep sense of gratitude and humility. All her plans, all her schedules, all her careful monitoring through cameras had led her to this moment, a moment where she could see, in person, the impact of genuine compassion. She realized that she had underestimated the power of human connection, and that the smallest acts, done consistently and with heart, could have the greatest effect. As she watched him continue to care for the triplets, she felt a shift within herself. She began to see the world differently, to understand that control and discipline, while important, could never replace love, empathy, and human connection. She realized that this man had taught her a lesson she had never expected, that heroism is not always measured by rank, title, or recognition. Sometimes it is found in the quiet, selfless acts that change lives profoundly. The triplets clung to him, laughed with him, and sought his attention with complete trust. She watched, unable to tear her eyes away, feeling a mix of awe and relief. She knew that her children were safe, happy, and loved in a way that went beyond physical care. She realized that this bond, formed quietly and without expectation, was something rare and precious. She took another deep breath, feeling a sense of resolve. She would no longer view him as just a janitor. He was someone extraordinary, someone who had earned a place in her children's lives through dedication, patience, and love. She knew that she wanted him to remain part of their world, not just as a caretaker, but as a trusted presence who could continue to bring joy and stability to their daily lives. In that moment, she understood something profound. She had been trained to lead, to command, and to control. But she had learned, through observation and now through direct experience, that true care and heroism often came quietly, humbly, and without expectation of recognition. And sometimes the greatest impact on a life is made not by authority or expertise, but by presence, empathy, and genuine love. She stepped back, letting him continue with the children, and allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection. She felt gratitude for his actions, respect for his character, and hope for the future of her children. She realized that she had witnessed something rare, the selfless care of a man who had entered her family's life not out of obligation, but out of genuine compassion. And as she watched him laugh and play with the triplets, she knew that her life and the lives of her children had been forever changed by his quiet, unwavering presence. After meeting him in person, she felt a sense of peace she had not experienced in a long time. For weeks, she had watched him from afar, unsure of his intentions, admiring his care, but unsure of how to approach him. Now she understood. He was not just a janitor or a passerby in her life. He was someone extraordinary, a person who had chosen to give love, patience, and attention to her children without expecting anything in return. And the impact of his presence could not be overstated. The triplets sensed the change as well. Their laughter grew louder, their smiles brighter, and their small hands reached out to him eagerly whenever he entered the room. One of the children, usually quiet and reserved, would seek his lap, resting her head on his shoulder and smiling shyly as he whispered gentle words of encouragement. Another, full of energy and curiosity, would run toward him, giggling and babbling excitedly, eager for the games and activities he had invented for them. And the youngest, still learning to communicate, would reach for his hand, sensing that he offered comfort and safety in a way no one else had. She watched from the doorway, taking in the scene, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. Her children were not just being cared for, they were being nurtured, understood, and loved. And it was all because of him. She realized that this man, who had entered their lives quietly, had become a vital part of their world, someone who had earned their trust and affection through patience, humility, and consistent kindness. She decided it was time to change the way she thought about him, and to show her appreciation in a meaningful way. That evening, after the children were settled for the night, she sat down with him and spoke openly. "I want you to know how much I appreciate everything you've done," she said. "Not just for my children, but for me as well. Watching you care for them has shown me something important, something I had not realized until now." He looked at her quietly, his eyes calm and steady. "I don't need thanks," he said softly. "I just do what I can. They need care, they deserve attention, and I can help. That's enough for me." She smiled, shaking her head slightly. "It's not enough. It's more than enough. You've given them happiness, trust, and love, things I worried I could never leave in anyone's hands. You've shown me that heroism isn't always about rank or recognition. Sometimes it's about patience, empathy, and simply being there when someone needs you." For the first time, he seemed to relax, a small smile forming on his face. "I never thought of it that way," he admitted. "I just wanted to help. I didn't expect anyone to notice or appreciate it." She reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder gently. "I do notice, and I do appreciate it, more than you can imagine. You've become a part of our lives, someone my children trust and love. And I want you to know that you have a place here if you want it." He looked at her, eyes wide with surprise. He had never expected such words. His quiet actions had been driven by instinct, empathy, and care, but he had never imagined they would be acknowledged so openly. He nodded slowly, a hint of emotion in his expression. I would like that," he said softly. From that day forward, things changed. She no longer watched him solely through the cameras. She observed him in person, interacted with him, and began to involve him more in the children's routines. The triplets, who had already formed a bond with him, thrived in this environment. Their laughter filled the house, their small hands reached out for guidance and comfort, and their eyes sparkled with trust and joy. She noticed subtle changes in herself as well. Watching him had taught her patience, humility, and the value of quiet, consistent care. She learned to slow down, to notice the little moments of joy and connection, and to trust in the goodness of someone who had proven their heart through actions rather than words. She began to understand that true care could not be measured by schedules, procedures, or training alone. It required presence, attention, and empathy, and he embodied those qualities fully. The janitor, for his part, continued his work with the same dedication and humility he always had. He did not seek recognition or reward, but he did begin to form a deeper connection with her, one built on mutual respect and trust. They would discuss the children's needs, plan activities together, and share observations about small milestones that brought them joy. He became not only a caregiver, but a partner in nurturing the triplets' growth and happiness. She began to see how much the children had grown under his care. They were more confident, more engaged, and more willing to explore their surroundings. They laughed more freely, expressed themselves more clearly, and responded to challenges with resilience and curiosity. She realized that this progress was not due solely to her efforts, but to the quiet, consistent influence of someone who had entered their lives without expectation and had given his heart fully to their well-being. One afternoon, she watched him teach them a small song, clapping along to the rhythm and encouraging them to participate. One child, who had struggled to engage with music before, sang along with a bright smile. Another, shy and hesitant, joined in slowly, her voice gaining confidence with each repetition. The youngest, still learning words, clapped and babbled along, delighted by the sound of voices and laughter. She felt a lump in her throat, overwhelmed by the simple yet profound impact of his presence. She began to reflect on the lessons she had learned from him. Discipline, control, and training were important, but they could not replace love, empathy, and human connection. True heroism was not always about titles, ranks, or accolades. Sometimes it was about showing up day after day with patience, attention, and a willingness to care. He had demonstrated this quietly, humbly, and without seeking recognition, and the effect on her children had been extraordinary. She realized that she wanted to support him in return. To ensure that his efforts did not go unnoticed or undervalued, she began to provide him with resources, assistance, and encouragement, allowing him to continue his work with greater ease and stability. She recognized that his dedication deserved recognition, not for pride, but to ensure that the children continued to receive the care and love they needed. Over time, the bond between her, the janitor, and the triplets deepened. They became a team, united not by obligation, but by trust, respect, and shared care. The triplets flourished in this environment, their laughter, curiosity, and joy reflecting the love and attention they received. And she found herself transformed as well, learning to appreciate the quiet power of empathy, the importance of patience, and the profound impact of simple, consistent acts of kindness. One evening, she watched him gently tuck the triplets into bed, reading them a short story and whispering soft words of encouragement. The children snuggled close, listening intently, their faces relaxed and happy. She realized that this simple routine, repeated with care and attention, had created a sense of stability and love that no schedule, rule, or plan could achieve. It was a bond built on trust, respect, and genuine affection, and it had changed all of their lives. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for the way he had entered their lives. He had arrived quietly, unnoticed at first, yet had become an essential presence. His humility, patience, and love had shaped the children's days in ways she could never have predicted. And she understood that the most meaningful acts in life were often the quietest, performed without expectation, but carrying the greatest weight. As she reflected on everything that had happened, she realized that her perspective on life had shifted. She had spent so long valuing control, discipline, and rank, believing that these were the most important measures of success. But now she saw that true value lay in care, empathy, and the ability to connect with others on a human level. The janitor had taught her this lesson, not through words or instructions, but through quiet, consistent actions that demonstrated love, patience, and understanding. The triplets thrived under this care, and she began to see their confidence grow. They explored small challenges with curiosity, expressed themselves more freely, and laughed with abandon. She realized that the foundation for this growth was not just her efforts, but the consistent presence and guidance of someone who had entered their lives with a heart full of care. She also noticed the joy he brought to her own life. Watching him interact with her children reminded her of the beauty of human connection, the importance of kindness, and the value of selfless care. She felt gratitude not only for his actions, but for the lessons he had taught her about patience, empathy, and the quiet power of love. Over time, the house transformed. It was no longer just a home where she monitored her children's care through cameras. It became a place of laughter, joy, and connection. The triplets were happier, more confident, and more engaged with the world around them. She felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that they were cared for by someone who understood their needs, respected their individuality, and loved them unconditionally. And she knew that this story would stay with her forever. The janitor had entered their lives quietly, without expectation or recognition, and had become a hero in the truest sense of the word. His patience, humility, and unwavering care had shaped the children's days, taught her lessons she could not have learned otherwise, and created bonds that would last a lifetime. In the end, she realized that heroism was not always about titles, uniforms, or recognition. Sometimes it was about showing up day after day with patience, empathy, and love. Sometimes it was about quietly shaping lives, building trust, and creating moments of joy and connection. And sometimes it was found in a janitor who chose to care for 3 children as if they were his own, changing their world and hers forever.